Good afternoon and welcome to Politics in the Pulpit here on your hometown station, KHTS AM 1220 and 98.1 FM. This is your holy host, the Bishop of Santa Clarita, back for another opportunity to do the two things that nobody really wants to do in public, and that's to talk about religion and politics. And most importantly, we're going to do what most people don't want to do with those two things. We're going to make a mix. So that's what we're going to do today. If you're listening for the first time, we're so glad that you have tuned into the show. If you are a regular, thank you so much for being part of the Freedom's Way / Politics in the Pulpit family here on your hometown station. And listen, this is our second week now with Jen, who, of course, is filling in here as our board op. Of course, many of you know that my son Jerry was here for about a year. But Jen, thanks for coming back this week. You braved it.
I figured I can handle week number 2. I don't know about week 3. We'll see.
Yeah, well, I guess it depends on what we talk about today and whether I'm able to push people out of my life, right?
That's always the goal, though, right? Just a typical Wednesday for us.
Exactly. Now, Jen, are you enjoying the? I think Sunday was the first official day of fall. Why does it seem like when fall happens in Southern California, it becomes 100 degrees?
It's not fall at all. I know. And I'm from the Midwest originally. I'm a transplant, so it's a little difficult for me to get into the fall spirit when it is 100 degrees.
Do we have any fall stuff out in your house, like the pumpkin spice candles?
Not yet, but we will. We will. I'll will it. Yeah, I'm willing the universe to bring in cooler temperatures.
So I had this lady in our church on Sunday, and she's like so into the fall months, and so she so wants it to be cold. And she says, I'm just refusing to acknowledge the fact that it's hot, and I'm wearing sweaters. And I says, if you want to be hot, go right ahead and be hot.
Yeah, I did that once or twice, and I thought, this is really dumb. What am I doing?
Well, Jen, thanks for coming back onto the
course.
show and being our board op, and looking forward to more opportunities to chat in the future.
Of course.
Well, today we've got a great show. Obviously, we're just about 40 days away from probably one of the most consequential elections of our time. I know you've heard that. It sounds anecdotal. It sounds like it's oft repeated. I get it. But the fact is, I really do think this is going to be one of the most consequential, and there have been many others as well. But this one is, for our time, for our modern time, one of the most consequential elections. And what I can't understand is there are still a lot of people, specifically within the evangelical community, that are going to sit this election out. They're just not going to vote. And they think that there really isn't a choice, that there's no binary choice between somebody who is at least right on the majority of the issues and somebody who's wrong, at least from my perspective, on a majority of the issues. And so I have brought back onto the show Pastor Levi Secord, who, of course, is no stranger to politics in the pulpit. He's been on a couple of times before. Pastor Levi is the pastor of Christ Bible Church in the blue state of Minnesota, and that would be, of course, the state that Tim Walz, the current vice presidential candidate for the United States of America, is governor. So, Pastor Levi, how are you, sir?
Good. Thanks for having me, Jerry.
And I know you just had a conference the last few days, I think over the weekend. How did that go? And tell us a little bit about the content of that conference.
Yeah, we had a conference called Till Kingdom Come, Political Engagement in Light of the Lordship of Christ. So that was Friday and Saturday of this last week. It went off really well. We had a couple speakers from my alma mater, the Southern Baptist Theological Seminary, Steve Wellham, Brad Green. I spoke once on secularism, its failures, and then a biblical alternative, kind of laying out a Christian view of the state and church and how they can work together. That's similar to Christian nationalism, at least some forms of it, but I think adds a little bit more of a distinctly Baptist twist to it that I think irons out some of the problems. It was well received. The conference went well, but I'm also glad to be on this side of it.
Yeah, we had ours Monday night, and this is our 18th, what we call the Fall Preachers Fellowship, and it was attended well. Had over 20 pastors there, and full congregation on Monday night, and it was good to hear from a pastor that I have never heard from before. Pastors in the Commonwealth of Virginia. So glad that things went well for you. Glad that things went well for us here in Southern California. But I want to talk about your article that you wrote just a couple weeks ago for Christ Overall. And by the way, folks can find this article, The Courage to Vote, The Moral Mandate to Vote, by Levi Secord at christoverall.com. And so I encourage you to go over there and grab this and look at it. But let's just start by asking, how has the feedback been on this article? Have you had any pushback, or have people been pretty positive in reference to what you wrote here?
Yeah, I mean, this was a really, really tough article for me to write at the beginning. I was assigned it a couple months ago on how not voting is an act of cowardice, which I generally agree with. Now, sometimes some people might not vote, not out of cowardice, but out of something else. But how refusing to vote could be an act of cowardice. And I wrote the article first in August. I hated it. I ripped it up, started from scratch, wrote it again, hated it, ripped it up, started from scratch. Third time was a charm. Came back better. I didn't have much hope for it, but I was surprised by how much positive feedback I got from that article, because I didn't think it was going to be that good. Turns out that it benefited some people. I haven't really received a lot of pushback. Somebody online who I don't think reads very carefully said something dumb about it, but that's just the internet, right? People don't read things carefully and you say things that you're not saying. Like, they argued that I was saying that we're basically beholden to vote for Republicans no matter what forever, because they're not as bad as Democrats, and that was not my case at all.
One of the guys that you quote here right at the outset of the article is one of the guys that I used to like maybe 10 years ago, but has just become more and more insufferable, along with the likes of Russell Moore and a few others. But David French, and you quoted a tweet of his that says, quote, "The next couple of months are going to be full of accusations that a person can't be a Christian and vote how they're voting. Ignore these voices. There is no credible argument that our vote defines our walk with God." Well, let's go ahead and pick apart that tweet if we can, Levi. Does our vote, at least on an evangelical perspective, a Christian perspective, does our vote seem to somehow define a little bit of what our walk is with God?
Well, Paul can say in 1 Corinthians that whether you eat or drink, do everything to the glory of God. So if something as inconsequential as how you eat and drink says something about your walk with Christ, how could voting not? I mean, it's really a mind-numbingly dumb statement for someone like French to make. And I don't say that lightly, but in my article I dissect that because it assumes that voting is a morally neutral act. Because it's like, well, you can do it however you want. Well, that means that God doesn't care. Well, I mean, again, if you were in Nazi Germany in the 1930s and a Christian, and some Christians did, vote for Adolf Hitler, does God not care about that? Right? Like, of course, that's an extreme example, but those are real things that happen. Right? And when we look back at history and see some of our Christian forefathers who voted for candidates who supported slavery, did God care about that? Yes, he did. Should they have done that? No, they shouldn't have. It's like God speaks about the state, Romans 13, that he institutes it for our good, and that the state exists to punish evildoers. God has given the state the sword to punish evildoers, which means the state is not a morally neutral area. In fact, the state is primarily concerned with righteousness and justice. It's all about morality. So yes, voting, how you vote, why you vote, your heart motivations behind it, says a lot about what you believe about God. I mean, I was just listening to some polling data today. There's no surprise here that the vast majority of atheists, people who reject God, their number one issue in this election is protecting abortion. And that most atheists vote Democrat, and most evangelicals don't. They vote on the other side. Why? Because it does say something about your most fundamental and important beliefs.
The other thing that French says here, and it's a bit of an assumption, I'm assuming, but he says the next couple of months are going to be full of accusations that a person can't be a Christian and vote how they're voting. I don't think we're saying they're not a Christian. We're just saying they shouldn't vote that way. Is that right?
Yeah. So some people ask me, like, can a Christian vote for a Democrat? And I said, yeah, because you're just asking in basic. The assumption of that question is, can a Christian sin? Well, of course Christians can sin, right? And so, yeah, a Christian can. The question is, should they? Should you vote for this person? No, you shouldn't. And so you have multiple different reasons why somebody might vote for a Democrat like Kamala Harris. One, they could be totally ignorant of what's actually going on. If you're brainwashed by the left stream media and you believe everything they say, then yeah, you're probably deceived. Right? So you're either ignorant or you're deceived, or there are, I think, some people by their political involvement. We see the fruit of the tree. Some of them are not really Christian. I don't think that's hard to say. Just like some people who worship the very ground that Donald Trump walks on and call themselves evangelicals probably aren't Christian either. And so there's a lot that goes into voting, your heart motivation, what you want, and who you're voting for. That all reveals something. And so my main beef with French on that is that he's assuming that this is morally neutral and that God doesn't care how you act in this realm. And that's just not true.
You know, when I read your article a couple weeks ago, Levi, the thought that came into my mind, and I actually mentioned this last week at the conclusion of our show, it reminds me of Pilate when he washed his hands ceremonially of the guilt of Jesus before the crowd. And in a sense, basically saying, I'm neutral, you know, when in reality, he knew that Jesus Christ was innocent and just acquiesced to the crowd, right? I mean, the prophecies of Christ going to the cross notwithstanding, obviously, but it's almost like you're washing your hands ceremoniously saying, I'm neutral, and that isn't the case.
Yeah, there's no neutral territory here, and I think the Pilate example is helpful, as I again point out in the article. In our form of government, every citizen is a part of the governing authority structure. And so if you're going to stay home because you can't make a decision, it would be like a governor or a senator or whatever just refusing to do his duty. Like, our governing system is this: the people elect representatives who stand in their place, which means every citizen has a moral obligation to use the authority delegated to them for righteous and holiness, right? To advance righteousness and holiness. I don't think it's that hard. We're a government of the people, by the people, and for the people. And so we get the government we deserve. Some of the most recent numbers I've heard said 37% of evangelicals don't vote. We're still one of the largest voting blocs in the country, but can you imagine if we were up to 80 to 90% of evangelicals showed up and voted? How different would our country look today? Very different.
Absolutely.
But we're derelict of our duty, and we refuse to govern well because we think that we have people like David French saying out there, well, God doesn't really care what I do with that. No, you have authority. You're a governing official as a citizen. That is an office of authority in this country. And if you refuse to use it, you are derelict in your duty.
To underscore what you're saying there, Levi, in the second part of your article where you talk about our Christian duty to vote, and you mention that we live in a representative republic, you say, quote, in the American system, to be a citizen is to be a governing official. And I think that's a powerful statement and something that I think most Christians either don't know, or if they do, they're taking it for granted. As a citizen, we are a governing body, are we not?
Yeah, we are. I mean, if we go even into a very churchy type world, right? Nine Marks has a lot of wonderful material on how church governance should work. So church has a government, state has a government. And one of the books Jonathan Leeman wrote is called Don't Fire Your Church Members. And he argues that a church member is an office in the church. And I think he's right. But even more so, it's even clearer that in the state, the citizen in a democracy or a representative republic is an office. You're an office holder. You elect representatives. So the representative from Minnesota, from my district, represents me. He stands in my place and votes on laws, right? So we have this delegated, derived authority. And so, yeah, we admit that it is a spread-out authority that citizens act as in total and whatnot. But again, our country is very, very, very divided right now, and elections are swung by 10,000 votes in a lot of these states or less. And again, 37% of evangelicals stay home and don't vote. They go to the polls, and they go to the primaries before this, and you demand good candidates. You will get good candidates, but you have to actually do the hard work of self-governance.
You say here in your article, the morality of voting. Governing is all about morality, and so is voting. And then you say underneath French's assertion, that tweet that we read earlier, that how we vote says little about our walk with God, is the assumption that the act itself is morally neutral. And you say, and I think rightfully so, one of the great lies of secularism is this myth of neutrality, that the state can be somehow detached from morality. And is this what the basic crux of a David French and a Russell Moore and the David Platts of the world. Is this their angle? Is this the type of notion that they're trying to convey?
I think so, but I don't think they can consistently apply it, right? Because they still use moral categories to denounce Trump and his policies, right? They still use some moral categories to denounce even abortion laws. So they seem to be somewhat consistent in applying that. But then when they get to the big picture of voting, for some reason, I think it's because of the secularist assumptions, where there's like, well, there's some bad on this side and there's some bad on that side, so God doesn't really care. And I get it. Like there are severe imperfections with the Republican Party, and Trump has brought them in some ways, particularly on abortion, into a less righteous position. But if you go point by point on every major political issue today, there is no comparison between the Republican Party and the Democrat. Whether you're talking about gender, sexuality, parental rights, not mutilating our children chemically or physically altering their bodies forever, property rights, law enforcement, not getting into unneeded wars, low tax policies, immigration, respecting borders, all of these things, and abortion, all of these things, the Republican Party is demonstrably more righteous than the other side, and it's not even close.
I think you would recognize that obviously the Republican platform from 2000 compared to the Republican platform today of 2024, not only is the one from 2000 much wordier than the one that is just bullet points today in the current iteration of the Republican Party, but a lot of people are saying because of that difference between 2000 and 2024, that the Republican Party has definitely gone soft on abortion, which you and I would probably say they've definitely moved in a leftward lurch on abortion. But at the same time, doesn't the 2024 platform still offer a state to be able to outright ban abortion, but that would not be the case with the current Democratic platform?
Yeah, so the Supreme Court ruled, right, that the issue goes back to the states. So let's say Kamala gets the trifecta, she gets elected, and she passes a national abortion law, which she says she's going to do, which is wicked, vile, and evil. That would get appealed to the Supreme Court, and we'll see if they'd stick to their guns and say, no, it's not a federal issue, it's a state issue. But so the Republican Party seems to have said, hey, this is our off-ramp, right? We can punt this on the national question because the Supreme Court says it's going to the states. So we say, yeah, they cite the 14th Amendment, which the pro-life movement has done for decades. And they say now it's up to the states to enforce it. I'm not sure on the legality of that, if that's really the best way to go. But it does say that you can pass laws that include banning abortion. Right? It doesn't say banning abortion, but it says the states can enforce this in reference to the 14th Amendment. And so it does leave a path forward for the banning of abortion in all 50 states. So then you have to look at the party platforms of those states. I've looked at several of them. California is kind of wishy-washy on this. Sorry, Jerry. The California Republican Party. But Minnesota, North Carolina, all these other states have very strong still pro-life, sanctity of life statements. And so to just come in like some individuals at the Gospel Coalition have come in and said both parties are pro-choice. That is absolutely a farce. It's a lie. I think it's motivated by people who have Trump derangement syndrome. No pro-choice person would look at that where it says the states can ban abortion and say, oh, yeah, that's our position. No,
let me stop you right there, Levi. We're going to come to a hard break right now. I want to pick your brain on that exact same topic when we come back on the other side of the break. You're listening to Pastor Levi Secord. Just wrote a great article for Christ Overall called The Morality of Voting and the Courage to Vote. And we'll talk to him right after the break on Politics in the Pulpit here on your hometown station. All right, we're back here on Politics in the Pulpit on your hometown station, 98.1 FM and AM 1220. If you're just joining us, we're talking to Pastor Levi Secord, the pastor of Christ Bible Church in the great state of Minnesota. And he wrote a wonderful article for ChristOverall.com. You can check it out there, called The Courage to Vote, The Moral Mandate to Vote. And when we last left, just before the break, Pastor Levi, you were waxing eloquent about states' rights and the possibility that within our current Republican Party platform, we still have the opportunity through states' rights, federalism, if you will, to ban abortion outright, but that is not the case with the Democratic Party platform as of today. So continue with that conversation, if you would, sir, unabated.
Yeah, so again, when you're looking at party platforms, and we've become so anti-federalist in our society, we only think about the federal government. right? We don't think about federalism as in the states have authority too. The GOP party platforms from state to state are largely very clearly pro-life, and so that's why we've seen since the reversal of Roe v. Wade all of these anti-abortion laws go into effect around the country, and for that we should be grateful. Contrary to that, Kamala Harris is arguing, and just this week I believe even said if you give her the majority in the House and Senate, they're going to get rid of the filibuster and pass a national abortion ban or a national abortion law that will probably enforce abortion on every state through 9 months. And so if you look at those two things, and we can say on the one hand that the move from the old GOP national platform to now was a step in the wrong direction on abortion. 100% agree with that. But it does say it does give the states the authority to ban abortion, right? That these two stances are not morally equal. And in fact, all those people who don't want to vote for Trump because of abortion, they're going to be voting alongside, or at least having the same effect alongside the ghoulish people who are supporting Harris, who want to use that federal power to murder children in the womb. And so I think it's a clear choice. I just don't get it. And again, people like Joe Carter at the Gospel Coalition who are painting these two positions as morally equal, as both equally pro-choice, it's absurd, and it's clearly done with some level of malicious intent towards Trump and Republicans.
There's something else that you say in your article that I think is one of those statements that get bandied about every 4 years, and that is, we're voting for the lesser of two evils. Would you kind of comment on that as to how you frame it here in your article about this notion of the lesser of two evils and why that isn't necessarily the case?
Yeah, my point in that is that when we frame a question like that, like we see our reporters do this all the time, they frame a question to try to get you in a gotcha moment, right? The Pharisees did this to Jesus too. It's like, I've got you now, right? Mm-hmm. So this woman, she was married 7 times, all her husbands died. Which one's going to be her husband in the new creation? And Jesus is like, you don't even understand the power of God. It's like, you don't get it. Like, just stop. So how you frame a question matters. And when you frame the question, both of these are evil choices, no Christian wants to partake in evil. So if you're asking, should we vote for the lesser of two evils? The answer for a Christian should obviously be, no, we can't. Like, we don't partake in evil. We expose it. And so this is why I think it's not a fair framing of the question. The question should be which of the two choices before us is the most righteous option. If Paul in Romans 13 can refer to the state as good, when he's talking about a Roman state that is far worse than our state is right now, and he can still refer to it as good and not a lesser of two evils or a lesser evil, he refers to it as objectively good, in the sense that when it's fulfilling its God-given role, it's good. We can say the same thing. Like, when the state and the governing officials who are wicked and unbelievers, just like the Roman were, do with the sword what they're supposed to be doing, it's still good. And so what we're looking for is individuals who will wield that sword the most righteously in line with God's commandments. And so we're not looking for perfection. We're not going to get a perfect Savior until Christ comes back. So until then, we're looking for the best option, the most righteous option.
Which is exactly how you conclude this article, Levi. You say, quote, therefore Christians must vote for the party and politicians who will enact the most righteous laws and policies. We must do so with great courage and hope not in politicians, but in the God who is sovereign over the affairs of men. As a part of we, the people, Christians must execute their office according to God's standards and for his glory. And with that said, and by the way, I think that is well said and well stated, Levi, where you say, quote, we must vote for the party and politicians who will enact the most righteous laws and policies. So, with that said, what do you say to our Christian friends, some of which you and I know by name, who are pastors and who are, leading, Christian think tanks and things of that nature, who say, I'm just going to sit out this election. I think both candidates are, immoral people, and I'm not going to cast a vote. What do you say to that individual who happens to be a friend as well?
Well, I think I start with, again, whether or not both parties are immoral. Of course they are, right? And so was George Bush, George W., so was Ronald Reagan, right? They're all immoral, right? So the question, again, isn't their personal past. The question is what policies are they going to enact? Like I'm hiring someone for a specific job. I'm not hiring him to be a pastor. And then the second thing I would say to them is, okay, don't let those, because again, there's a reason why they attack Republicans on their moral failings, is because they know that their base actually is a moral base that has a moral compass. But you notice what they're doing, the people on the left, is they're using your morality to advance their immorality. Like, you have to realize the game that they're playing with you. They want to use your religious scruples as a tool to advance unspeakable evil. Don't fall for it. And then my third thing would be, again, what we've kind of talked about. You are a part of this governing system. You just refusing to vote is a dereliction of duty. If you're the governor, and let's say the governor's in my congregation, and he's got a really tough situation, and the health of our state relies upon it, but he's like, I don't like any of the options, so I'm just going to do nothing and just let it go. You don't get to do that as a governor. Or you don't get to do that as a pastor, or as a father, or as a husband. These offices have authority, and with authority comes a duty and a responsibility to use it, even when it's hard.
Yeah, hurrah to that, and that's exactly how I feel about it, Levi, and I'm glad that you said it that way, and I'll probably steal some of those bullet points, if you will, because I've got some friends here that I think have concluded this thing wrongly, and are just going to sit this out, and are encouraging their congregations. Some of these congregations are smaller, some of these congregations are larger, just basically saying you need to follow my lead, and I think that lead is a horrible lead. I think everyone, regardless whether you're a Christian or not, should engage in the political process that is going to be afforded to us here in about 40 days. And depending on which state you're in, you're already voting. I mean, Pennsylvania's already voting, Virginia's already voting, California's going to be voting here in about another week and a half as ballots drop. And so I think when a pastor says from the pulpit, I'm not voting and I don't think you should either, I think that's a dereliction of his duty, and I think that's an irresponsible statement. Real quickly, while I have you on the phone, Levi, I want to talk a little bit about the political situation in our country, because obviously I have not spoken to you since the former president they tried to kill him a second time while he was golfing a couple of weeks ago. I was just wondering, what is this notion of the left constantly saying, and the richness of this, by the way, Levi, of the left constantly saying that Trump is a existential threat, he is going to end democracy, but yet he's the guy that someone's trying to keep killing. What's going on there?
Yeah, I mean, like we need to talk about this. 2 attempts on President Trump's life. Just also that week, they arrested somebody who was planning to kill 6 Supreme Court justices.
Yeah, like 4 days later.
Right? Yeah, and then there was the attempt on those same justices a few years ago. I'm like, there's a real political violence problem coming from the left right now. Some of it is their rhetoric. Some of it is that the government is these people's God. And so when you threaten their God, right, people act irrationally. And so, yeah, we are very much in a dangerous place. Even like the second attempt on the president's life, like the first one was shocking, and the second one, like, we barely yawned as a society.
It's become blasé.
Yeah, that's not a good sign, right? It's not a good sign. I fear that there'll probably be another attempt on his life, especially if he wins.
Yeah, I think I said this to you the first time I had you on air with me, Levi. My greatest fear is if he does win, and let's just throw out a scenario that I'm, imagining in my head here, that I'm hoping does manifest, that perhaps maybe Donald Trump becomes the first Republican since 2004 to win the popular vote by 2-3 points. And again, I understand that's kind of stretching it here, but let's just say this happens. He wins the popular vote by 2 to 3 points.
No, there's several polls that have him winning by a couple points.
That is true, and let's just say that plays out, and he ends up getting 325 to 340 electoral votes, and we'll just throw in states like Virginia, perhaps New Hampshire. I know Minnesota's a long shot, but let's just say New Mexico or something like that. And these states come in there. And he tends to have now a mandate, right? This would be a large electoral landslide for the modern day. He has won the popular vote, and now he has this mandate. And to throw a little bit more into that, he wins the Senate. He got 54, 55 seats, and he ends up maintaining this Congress and increases it by maybe a dozen seats. My greatest fear is between November 6th and January 20th of 2025. That, I think, is going to be some of the greatest threats to his life will happen and play out between that time. What say you, Levi?
I agree with you. I'm glad that they're giving him more support now. I had said that I think DeSantis missed a real opportunity after that second one, is he should have called up the Florida National Guard and said, hey, you're going to go with him wherever it goes. Right? I mean, I agree with you. If there is, I expect there to be rioting. I expect some of those blue cities to be in flames again. Again, like we've seen this type of political action from the people on the left.
Yeah.
It's not uncommon.
What else has Pastor Levi going to be writing down the line here with either Christ Overall or maybe World Report? Anything you've got coming down the pike, Levi, that we can talk about?
Yeah, next month I have another article for Christ Overall. I just submitted it yesterday to them. It's on Revelation chapter 13 and the beast and how that gives us a balance to Romans 13, because Revelation 13 tells us about the beastly potential of the state, that the state has this potential to serve the great dragon, and we see that working itself out through from Genesis to Revelation, that the state will either be a faithful servant to God or it'll be a beastly servant to the great dragon.
Well, that's going to be interesting. I can't wait to hear that, and I'm assuming also you're going to maybe show your hand on your eschatological persuasion in that article?
No, I mean, I don't think, like, if you're pre-mill, post-mill, all-mill, like, you look at that beast and you either say, well, that beast is past, it was Rome, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or it's all-mill, it's generally descriptive of this age of government, or your pre-mill that it's something that's coming in the future. But these beast imagery is clearly built off of the beasts of Daniel 7, which we all know to be historical. So my main point is, no matter your eschatological beliefs, this is telling you that the state has the potential to become a beast, and that has to be thrown into your mix of forming your political theology. When you're looking at what does the Bible say about the state, God intends it for good. Well, God intends everything in His creation for good. Satan takes it and perverts it and uses it for evil. And just like with everything else in life, it also does that with the state. And I think once you grasp that, and when you read your Bible from cover to cover, you see that the main chief earthly enemy of God's people at every major point of world history, besides the fall in the garden, right, is the state. At every point, whether it's Egypt, whether it's the Canaanites, Philistia, whether it's Assyria, whether it's Babylon, whether it's Rome, whether it's the Sanhedrin, whether it's the wicked kings of Israel and Judah, the main way Satan goes after God's people is through the state, and we shouldn't miss that.
Which is why I think a lot of people kind of thought we were kind of, in the land of zombies between 2020 and 2023, right? They thought that was a sample run, if you will. At least that's how some of the pastors that I was hanging out was framing the whole situation. But I'm going to give you the last word on this, Levi. We're only 40 days away from the election. From the polls that I've seen today, some of which are left-leaning polls. I'm assuming you're looking at the same polls. What is your thought on November 5th? Does Trump win outright on November 5th, or is this going to be one of those long, drag-out 3, 4, 5, 6 days later we have to determine whether or not Trump wins or Harris wins?
Yeah, I don't think you should expect it to be solved on November 5th either way. I'm still leaning. I think it's a 60% chance Trump wins, 40% he loses. I think the polls are all way tighter than they were 4 years ago, like 5 or 6 points tighter. And even some of the more liberal polls, even New York Times would have them tied or has Trump winning, right? And like these are not things you saw 4 years ago, and that's not really things you saw 8 years ago. So I think that it's more likely than not that Trump wins. There's 40 days to go. A lot, as we know, can still happen. I mean, the first assassination attempt seems like a lifetime ago. Like, so who knows what's going to happen next? But as it stands today, if the election were today, I think it's a 60-40 chance.
Pastor Levi Secord, the pastor of Christ Bible Church in the great state of Minnesota, just wrote a wonderful article. I encourage you to go out and read it, The Courage to Vote, The Moral Mandate to Vote. You can find it at ChristOverall.com. And you can / author Levi Secord there and grab that and share that, put it on Facebook, Instagram, whatever social platforms that you prefer. And Pastor Levi, thank you so much. And we probably won't talk to each other between now and the election, maybe a text or two, but Lord bless you as you keep serving the King.
Thanks, Jerry.
All right, well, listen, that's Pastor Levi Secord. Always grateful to have him come on, and I love his insight, and it's always good to get good insight from not only my preacher friends, but also those out there that are not believers, because I've got a few of them as well that have got some great perspectives. And you know, the next 4 days are going to be interesting. There's an anxiety that I think sets in. I think you probably feel it. The anxiety is kind of palpable, especially for people like me who kind of live and breathe politics. I like to jokingly say to my congregation that politics is my favorite non-confrontational sport. However, in the last 5 to 10 years, it seems to be getting far more confrontational than it should be. But I'd like it to just kind of go back to a gentleman thing where we can just kind of disagree affably without having to fight over things. But who knows? I mean, things are going to get really interesting. I really feel that if former President Trump does win and wins decisively, things are going to be interesting. And if he wins barely, let's say if he wins by 270 electoral votes, which is exactly the exact number that is needed, I think things can go weird there too. And I don't want our country to come apart at the seams, but I do think that if it's going to, it's probably going to happen in the realm of politics. And that's because for some people, not everyone, but for some people, they've made this their church, they've made this their Bible, they've made this their doctrine, their dogma, and they worship at the feet of politics and government, and unfortunately, they take it very, very personal. You know what's going to happen if Trump loses? I'm just going to keep living, just like I did with Obama, and just like everybody else did with Bush, and just like everybody else did with whomever won, because our Constitution is greater than the sum of one man and his policies. So when we come back here on Politics in the Pulpit, I want to give you a quick plug about a great new resource for evangelical Christians, especially those of you out there that like the news. It's something called Clear Truth Media. We're going to talk about that when we come back here on Politics in the Pulpit on your hometown station. We're back here for our final segment on Politics in the Pulpit, and I want to just quickly, but right before I give you the shameless plug for this new media site here that I think will be just indispensable for those of us that are Christians that like to see things through a worldview that is biblical. I got an article here from Red State. This is funny. It dropped today. The people handling mail-in ballots call Trump an existential threat. So the question is, what could possibly go wrong? I mean, seriously. So you're kind of hoping that those that are handling these mail-in ballots can somehow try to be apolitical, at least when they're pressed or when asked to give an opinion. But then when the people that are handling our mail-in ballots are calling at least one of the presidential candidates a existential threat, what could possibly go wrong? And the article goes on to say, this is amazing. In the crucial swing state of Georgia, individual letter carriers who are members of the National Association of Letter Carriers, I didn't even realize there was such an association, received a letter that appears to be signed by Georgia NALC President Don Griggs, which says in part, quote, "If Donald Trump wins the upcoming election, it could prove an existential threat to our union and our contract. Your vote matters. Consider how the consequences could affect you, your job, and our union when deciding how to vote." Well, that's great. So obviously, I'm sure they'll out of the thousands of people that are handling our mail-in ballots, I'm sure nobody is going to mishandle them and misplace a bunch of them that have Trump's name on them, at least signed in there for president. But again, remember, if he is indeed the existential threat that the left says he is, then you have to do whatever it is to keep that threat from becoming president, right? So in many ways, I believe that they are validating in their mind that everything that they're doing is actually for the good of the country, whether you like it or not. And so, again, I mean, if he's the Hitler, then you have to do everything you can in your power to stop Hitler. At least that's the way I would see it. Well, for those of you out there that don't like slanted news on one end, I'm not going to give you a site here that isn't going to give you a slant. I think every news site is going to give you the slant, right? Even a Christian site is going to at least give you the news from a decidedly Christian perspective. But a few weeks ago, I came across something that is relatively new called Clear Truth Media. And this is just one of those sites that gives you the news from a decidedly Christian perspective, and many of us would like that, but we don't always get it, and so this is a site that has been put together by a whole host of people that are excellent, frankly. That have got great opinions, and I'm going to give you just a few of the things here that have been written. What most faith and politics sermons get entirely wrong, and of course that's an article written by Michael Clary, a great article. Then we get into history, the historic Eden, why the garden's reality matters for your faith, so on and so forth. And then of course there's tons of things here on human rights, tons of things on the upcoming election, and interesting one here from September 10th, just a few weeks ago, Covenant Shooter Manifesto, What to Know, and again, written from a decidedly Christian perspective. So a lot of good things here. Joe Boot, not necessarily a friend, but somebody that I'm aware of in the world of the Reformed movement, has written a great article here on the church and her mission. It's actually a YouTube thing that you can find right here through Clear Truth Media. And what this particular website is trying to do is offer an alternative to more left-leaning Christian stuff that you find in the Gospel Coalition and some of those other sources that have compromised a whole bunch and have become more woke and more progressive. And so Clear Truth Media, give it a check out. I think you'll enjoy it. You're not going to agree with everything, but that's the way life is, right, folks? But I encourage you to check it out, Clear Truth Media. Now, next week, we've not talked about any of the ballot initiatives that are going to be on your ballot here very, very soon, because we are coming very closely to ballots dropping here in California. And so if you've been listening to radio, if you listen to Facebook or watch Facebook, you know that the Facebook ads and the YouTube ads have been just, one after the other about Prop 33 and Prop 37 and a few other propositions as well out there. And so what we're going to do is we're going to bring in Deborah Pauly from the OC down in the conservative part of Southern California, or at least somewhat conservative part of Southern California. Deborah Pauly, of course, has been on our show several times. She is representative of Lex Rex, which is the law association down in Long Beach. And so we're going to walk through the propositions and try to inform you as much as we can on the pros and the cons, because, a lot of these propositions get worded in a way that trick you. And that's essentially what Prop 47 did a few years ago, right? It was worded in such a way that sounded just, very utopian. And, why wouldn't you vote for this? And here we are, suffering under the George Gascon reign, and Prop 47 is partial to thank for, all of the crime that we have today and the leniency that we have in our crime today. So we're going to talk to Deborah Pauly about that next Wednesday, and I think it'll be a great opportunity to just kind of thumb through those propositions and get you more informed on that. And of course, we're going to also talk to Jennifer Horn from Salem Radio, the Morning Answer, and that'll be in a couple of weeks, and I think that'll be a lot of fun. Well, we'll talk a little bit about the town hall event that happened a couple of weeks ago at the Universal Hilton. But either way, thanks for tuning in today at Politics in the Pulpit. This is my opportunity to say thank you again for joining us here on our hometown station as well as the hometown family. And we'll catch you here next week, same bat time, same bat channel on